Quorum is present. Do you need room or anything? Okay, good.
Watch out for my crutches.
All right, and I have started recording.
Just watch out for your crutches if you go behind me.
Well, good evening, everyone. Quorum is present for the February 2024 meeting of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. We will start with approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
All right, a second, please.
Second.
Great. Are there any amendments to make to the agenda? Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Great. Well, the agenda is approved. Next up, we have future board items and tours. Ally Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ally Rhodes, Director of Parks and Recreation. While I have the mic, I want to introduce you all to Aubrey Noble. She is our colleague from Planning Development Services. She supports Planning Board. ROSA is an important family milestone tonight. And so luckily we have great folks across the city and we really appreciate Aubrey supporting you tonight. With that, just some highlights for upcoming meetings. The most important that I would love you to highlight and underline and do whatever you need to do on your calendars. Your March meeting is happening a week earlier so that our staff and board members can enjoy the BVSD and CU spring break. We will be meeting Monday, March 18th. Two key notes about the location. This room is getting a significant technological renovation and is closed for the entire month of March. So we will be meeting at the Municipal Services Center. This building is on East Pearl. We'll send you, your appointment will be updated with the location. And if you have any questions about finding it, feel free to reach out. I think you all have my text number, so we can make sure to connect. The other thing I'll note is that will be our first fully hybrid meeting. We will be welcoming the public in person should they choose. We're very excited to have that milestone happening. With that, let me just tell you a few other exciting things for your calendar that are coming up. We are very excited in March to be coming back to you with concepts and the next phase for the court system plan. You might have noticed this weekend there was some positive coverage in the Daily Camera. I think Boulder's players celebrate Boulder Parks and Recreation was the gist of the headline, which I'm going to mark on my calendar. That was very exciting. So we have an open house next week. It is Monday evening at the OSMP Hub, which is off of JCC. Thanks, team. That public meeting is at the JCC. So that's Cherryvale and Arapahoe. We expect to have quite a large crowd. We have about 200 folks for the first public meeting of this planning process. And even though we know folks are excited about this plan, we know they also believe that they need to continue to show their numbers for us to listen. So we're excited for that public meeting. That team has been working very hard. The other thing just for April, I wanted to give you a heads up that that's when we'll be onboarding 3 new board members. So we have just finished interviews. Council will be making those appointments at their March 14th meeting if you want to listen in. And if not, we'll give you an update at that meeting the following Monday. And I think obviously there's a full agenda coming the next few months, but those are the highlights. And if anyone has any questions, let me know.
I don't have a question, but I have to leave early tonight because my son has a concert that I have to go to. So I'll have to leave at like 7:15, if that's okay.
We have a quorum, so that's wonderful. And if you all want to challenge yourselves to be done by then that is the board's purview and we support.
Okay, thank you.
I can talk fast, but I don't think I can talk that fast. Okay, any further questions? Nope. Next up is public participation. This portion of the meeting is for members of the public to communicate ideas or concerns to the board regarding parks and recreation issues for which a public hearing is not scheduled later in the meeting, and there is no public hearing, so all public comment will be taken now. The public is encouraged to comment on the need for parks and recreation programs and facilities as they perceive them. All speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and depending on the nature of your matter, you may or may not receive a response from the board or staff after you deliver your comments, but rest assured, we're always listening and we appreciate your feedback. So we have 2 people signed up for public comment. The first of these is Alan Smith. So if you're ready to go, Aubrey. Major Smith, you're welcome to unmute and begin speaking.
Well,
have 3
thank you.
minutes.
Thank you all very much.
I'm a longtime resident of Boulder, moved here in '88. Uh, I'm currently the commander of the Veterans of Foreign War post here in Boulder, and I am also a former member of the Park and Recs Advisory Board. And during my tenure there, we moved forward the Bill Bowers Pocket Park that's located on Table Mesa and Hartford Drive. And um, as I just want to have a shout out to the Park and Rec staff. They take such good care of the park, and this is the park that gets used all the time. It warms the cockles of my heart every time I go by and see young families enjoying the park and the facilities. So just wanted to give you all a shout out for what you're doing there. But Bill Bower was a member of the Boulder community and was also one of the pilots of the famous Doolittle raid in World War II. And he lived in this neighborhood for many years. And so it's awesome that the Parks Department decided to name this park after him. But there is nothing in the park that indicates who Bill Bowers was, what contribution he made to this community, or or to our country. And so there are a number of retired military officers that are, trying to advance a plaque to be put in the park. And I'm sure that you members of the Park and Recs Advisory Board are aware of that. And I'm just asking that if to the extent that you can, with the delays that happen and with the bureaucracy within the city, just kind of keep that moving forward. I realize, having served on the board years ago, that there's a process, there's reasons for those processes, they're all good reasons, but anything that you all can do to keep that moving along, I would appreciate it very much. And barring any questions or comments from you all, I yield back to the chair.
Thank you very much for your comments. And I might address this after the second person on the waiting list has had a chance to speak. So the next person up is Mitchell Magdovitz. So Mitchell, if you're ready, please unmute, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
All right, and I just wanted to point out my virtual timer was not working for Alan. So Mitchell, you will see a timer on the screen. Sorry about that, Alan. And Mitchell, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak here this evening, especially on the short notice I provided. Did you all have a chance to read my notes as far as a little bit of background, members of the board?
Yes, I got time just before the meeting started.
Okay. So recreational technical tree climbing is something that is very little known, even in a city like ours of Boulder, Colorado. I'm going to say fewer than 1 out of 100 people, if they're not tree care professionals, know what it is outside of just climbing as a kid. But it is basically climbing into trees using the same or similar techniques used by arborists around the world to access, move around, and descend trees. And we happen to, through our school, have one of the only tree climbing schools in the entire country. And I would hope that would be something that the city, once they know about it, would be proud to host and be home of. And the state, for that matter. There aren't even any in adjoining states. So it's something that is good for people's health, mentally, physically, and for some people, it changes the way they walk around the urban environment and engage with the urban and non-urban forests for the rest of their lives, because they've had an experience in the trees that their relationship to it is just forever changed. So it's a beautiful thing, and I would hope it's something that the city would be not only willing, but very excited to support as one of the few places in the country that offers a school for this. And while I started out with a close relationship, a supportive relationship with forestry, out of the blue, I just heard, I think it was a week or two ago, maybe 2 weeks, that they were no longer going to allow climbing in any parks on any tree. And I understand expenses, I understand interdepartmental cooperation, This is not something that is overly complicated. It's not something that hasn't been dealt with many, many times over for liability and whatever risk concerns there are. And I think it would be a real shame and disservice to the community to disallow this activity, especially with an organization like ours based here. And I yield my remaining 10 seconds back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. Okay, is there any feedback from the board or staff on either of these comments?
I would just say my husband works as an arborist sometimes, and I do think it's an important skill and something to have in the community if possible. I don't know about the liability and other insurance aspects of it because I know that's complicated, but I do think it's a valuable skill to have here.
And regarding Bill Bowers Park, initially there was a group of veterans who wanted to get a plaque and a more than a plaque, a little landscape element installed in Bill Bowers Park. And initially that was moving very slowly, and especially during the pandemic when everything moved slowly for understandable reasons. But I thought that had been progressing fairly well, and I hadn't heard back from that veterans group in recent months or years, even year and a half. So my assumption was that was moving forward at a reasonable pace. So if there are any roadblocks, I don't know about them, and I would like to hear about them. And I'd also like to hear feedback to Mitchell's comment about the tree climbing.
On the recreational tree climbing, I don't have information tonight. I just learned about this today, so I'm happy to get more information and get a follow-up to the board either at your next meeting or I can provide a written update, but I need to do some research first. And then on Bill Bower Park, our planning senior manager was over there jumping up and down, telling me he'd be happy to share a little more.
Yes, thank you, Ali. Mark Davison, planning manager for Parks. Project did slow down. We did spend with the group working closely with our communications and our equity office on the wording for the plaque, and that's took a little while to figure it out. But there was definitely a delay in us following up to move the design forward. Tina Briggs has been the project manager on that. We just had a conversation last week to see how we can advance it this year. So we do apologize. There was a delay, but we're definitely looking to get it on the books this year.
And have you reached an agreement on the wording for the plaque?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So we're in good shape to move forward with the design.
Is it a good compromise? No one's happy?
Feel like you've been in government longer than I. No, I think we got a good agreement. So I think everyone's happy.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to add a little more to that because what Mark is managing is, I mean, we talked about everything slowing down during the pandemic, but our CIP kept growing. Every year we planned for the next 5 years and we would add projects and not consider the human capital required to deliver them. And so what you will see this year is us really sticking to our work plan and not having capacity to handle some things that come over the fence. This is a smaller project. It still requires staff time to be thoughtful about the landscaping, who's going to operate it, and other elements. And so this is a very small example of how stretched our planning team is because we are still recovering from the backlog because we just didn't have the foresight to pause, and we've kept adding because we have such incredible backlog in our parks and we want to make them all better. So I think as we start, next month, you will start talking about the next 5-year CIP. And what you'll see is Mark has done an incredible job with his team. Darren's here also about what can we realistically deliver and trying to balance that with, really high and wonderful expectations for a community who loves parks and recreation and a director who wants it all tomorrow.
Thank you. Any further comments from the board? Okay. We'll move on to the consent agenda, which is comprised of approval of the minutes, updates from Director of Parks and Recreation operations updates, and planning, design, and construction updates. So let's start with a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Great. Are there any alterations, modifications to the minutes as they've been presented? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, minutes are approved. Next up is updates from the Director of Parks and Recreation. Oh, it's not a verbal matter. This is a written matter. I have a comment. I'm not sure if it goes under B, C, or D here. This is in regards to the cold weather action where you open the East Boulder Community Center to make place for 50 people who would otherwise not have had shelter. And it involved a lot of members of staff, not just in Parks and Recreation, but across the city. So I just wanted to congratulate you on a job well done. And I'm glad it turned out well and that we might have saved some lives. So thank you.
There were people all over the city and who did an incredible job over those 5 nights, and we appreciate that. Can I just alert you all? Aubrey just let me know that we do have someone wanting us to reopen public comment, and so that is a question for the board to consider.
Thanks. I didn't check with her to see if there was anyone else waiting. Sorry, Aubrey. Are there any objections to letting someone else participate? No. Okay.
All right, we have Lynn Siegel. Just give me a moment, Lynn, to allow you to talk and get the timer set up.
Well, that's kind of you. Thank you. I thought maybe that you have to sign up ahead of time with PRAB. There's no other boards that I have to do that with, so it was kind of confusing. So I'm kind of off the cuff here. But my one thought about PRAB was the interaction regarding the civic space and how that's, I'm not really clear on how that has come into a bit of conflict with the Landmarks Board and their attempts at getting that space landmarked and how that conflicts with PRAB. But I just would think that landmarking would be the most preservationist approach to the land. I'm also unclear about what happens to parking spaces, surface parking or other, if those are also landmarked, and if that could have a change if, you know, we're having less parking and more use of the space in some other way. I just want to thank you for all that you do otherwise. And of course, the other issue is, you know, the cost of keeping up these lands and the cost of running the whole department and that impact from increasing population in Boulder. And I'd just like to see that the population, if as much as possible, limited to the extent that the developers have to pay their way rather than putting up more and more high-end housing or converting commercial space like the Western Resource Advocates to demo it in order to get more more residential into it, 30,000 square feet instead of 19,000 square feet, which makes them want to demo it because they don't have a way to get the parking for that residential. Now, I know this doesn't involve PRAB directly, but indirectly it does, because the more there is a push for residential in this town, the more people are here and the more you have in your budget to service those people. I know in Denver, because of the homeless situation, they've had to close down their rec centers, earlier hours, you know, take things of service availability from the public. So I just ask that you somehow consider how to manage the population. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn. Any feedback? Okay, thanks. We'll move back to the consent agenda now. So is there any further comment on updates from the director and the Parks and Recreation operations updates and planning, design, and construction updates from the board?
Sorry. Yeah, thanks for all those updates. Appreciate the follow-up on the conversation we had at the retreat, signing the framework. And then I was also wanted to just applaud the staff involved in the effort around the very cold nights. I didn't realize it took 125 people were involved in that. So thank you all for doing that. I just had a question on the, thanks also for the update on the reservoir concessions. That's good news. You probably, I don't know, I'm sure you can't talk about any details and it looks like it's not due for a little bit, but do you have any sense of the interest?
Yeah, and I want to clarify because our team is, or actually, Scott, you can take this. I'm still building that muscle of realizing that I have a deputy director.
Thanks, Allie. And I also see Stephanie has turned on her camera and is here and probably can provide a little bit better update than I can as well. Stephanie Monroe is our senior manager that oversees our regional facilities. And she is the person that has spearheaded the RFP for concessions. So Stephanie, I'll yield over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Scott and Allie. Good evening, Stephanie Monroe. The RFP is out and I don't at this point have any idea of how many interest parties. We've had a couple questions that have come in that we'll prepare for posting those questions to the RFP before it closes. We do have a scheduled non-mandatory tour of the reservoir, and that is scheduled tomorrow. So I should know tomorrow if anyone shows up for in interest of taking a tour of the facility and seeing the site before the bid closes. But that was something that is voluntary and it's not required. It's just something we're providing. So I don't have any indication as to how many people might be showing up. We did send it out to quite a few people that had come to us in the past as far as an interest party or possible interest. So that list has been provided when the bid posted along with the normal mechanisms that the bid posts to. So as of right now, I don't know, but it's still very early in the process. And Ellie and Scott, I don't know, do you want to, it sounded like you wanted to say something else and I can surely add to that if you'd like me to.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely chime in as well and just say this RFP that is out there is kind of an interim plan for us because we will be here in 2024 working on a management and business plan for the reservoir. So we're looking for more of a stopgap for this next year to handle our concession services, but we do plan on putting together a full management plan that would be implemented for the summer of 2025 moving forward then.
And Scott, that's 25, 26, most likely.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, we will skip right over action items and matters for discussion information and move to matters from the department, starting with Pleasant View access improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this item is going to be presented by Senior Landscape Architect Darren Wagner. I don't think there's a clicker for here, but Aubrey, are you presenting this right now? You're going to have to just do the fun next slide, which thank you for your grace.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Darren Wagner, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. And for this item, we wanted to take the opportunity to update you on some recent stakeholder engagement efforts that we've conducted on the project, as well as share where we're at in developing these proposed improvements for both capital construction and for reducing the demand for vehicles on the site. So next slide, please. We also just want to take a moment too and just say that we feel like this is a good problem that we have. We see this complex as an incredibly valuable asset in our system in terms of advancing our goals around youth activity, and have been able through our partners to pull together some statistics based on, how many youth players are out there, how many adult players, what does that look like in terms of activating our community, as well as bringing in revenue to cover the maintenance and operation of that site. So we just don't like to miss opportunities to say what a, fantastic asset this is in our system. Next slide, Audrey. And then we also recognize that we have issues that we want to improve out there. And so are going through this process to work through those. So if you remember, we started the data collection back in fall of 2022, and last year worked on the analysis of those, as well as the development of some initial recommendations that our consultants provided for us to consider. Since that time, staff has worked through some refinements to those proposals and then taken those out to the immediate stakeholders involved in the site. And we're here tonight to, again, share the updates of that so that we can move into final design and eventually permitting in later this year, such that we can hopefully, if all goes well, maybe start some early site preparation by the end of the year, but more likely construct any of the capital improvements in early to mid next year. Next slide. So there will be no impact to field play this year in 2024, and likely very little in 2025 as we work on partnership agreements with our neighbors to accommodate those temporary impacts for construction. Next, please. But we are in conversation with our athletic organizations around ways that we can go ahead and inspire transportation demand management actions as early as this season in terms of incentivizing carpooling, for example. And so that will likely start this season. We did, as I mentioned, hold a meeting a few weeks ago on February 13th and strategically invited particular stakeholders who were either most directly impacted by the transportation issues that we have there, or most able to help us make a difference in terms of a collaborative solution to addressing those. So this is the general list of who we invited. And we had about 8 to 10 stakeholders come as representatives for these organizations. And although it was a small group, it was a really effective conversation that yielded a lot of positive support for where we are now. Next slide. We took the opportunity, sometimes it's hard to remember that, we do have a significant amount of parking on site. We do have 416 spaces on site, as well as a number of bike parking spaces and so on. And so at the stakeholder meeting, we just started out with this acknowledgement that we recognize that over time, even though that seems like a lot of parking, we have over time reduced the field size so that we could increase the number of touches on the ball so that we can increase youth activity out there. But that meant we weren't able to expand parking to keep up with that. So next slide, please. So it's resulted, as many of us know, in a number of issues out there. Some of them involve the existing circulation, and the two starbursts that you see there on the diagram are some of the hot spots within the lot itself, where there's a lot of circulation happening all in one spot, whether it's cars, bikes, pedestrians, people towing carts and coolers and so on. And so we recognize from a circulation standpoint, we have some improvements to make. We also know, based on the data collection that our consultants did back in 22, that for a significant portion of the day on Saturdays, we do not have adequate parking to support the demand. And that on Sundays, that's generally, we don't reach capacity. And so we've been able to confirm that Saturdays are the main days we need to address. We also know that when we have those issues on Saturdays, it does result in impacts to the surrounding neighborhood streets. And what you're looking at here is one diagram that shows in red, for example, where most of that parking impact happens in those neighborhood streets. And so when we work towards the the upcoming capital improvements, you can go to the next slide. We were last year again presented with these options from our consultants, where we were looking at two major options that we could consider. And one being that we on the left prefer the option A was to connect the parking lot down to Calmia with a one-way road connection down to Calmia, which would serve a lot of purposes, and I'll go into that in a moment. The other was to consider an enhanced drop-off and pickup area on the northern part of the lot. Both of those were aimed at trying to improve those circulation issues and the major safety issues that we have in there. In working through the details of how that might really look on the ground, staff really felt like that the option A was much more preferred. And in speaking with our stakeholders, they do agree that by providing that one-way connection out to Calmia, it would allow us to make significant use of the overflow parking in the church lot. And the church has expressed strong support and interest in working that out with us, especially on Saturdays. Whereas we felt that option B was, it still stood the chance of being abused in the sense that the drop off and pickup behavior sometimes gets, you wait in your car for an hour while, somebody's playing or going to practice, and it's not really drop off and pick up. And so we didn't feel like it would address the issues that we're trying to. And in terms of the sort of the bang for the buck, that option A was the one we moved forward into the conversations with stakeholders. So this is what we took to the stakeholders a couple of weeks ago, where we worked on initial conversations with the church to consider formalizing an agreement with them for overflow parking on Saturdays. The details of that are still to be worked out, but they're, again, very open to it. And then what that would allow is for access to actually come in off of 28th, such that if you're playing on certain fields, you would be directed or encouraged to park in the church parking lots on Saturdays, and not even need to go into our main lot. What that would potentially require is extending, there's a path that connects that church lot over to the fields themselves. So that might require extending that path and creating a formalized gate there where we would have additional bike parking, as well as pedestrian access. And then again, the other significant move would be to add that one-way connection down to Calmia on the southern end of the lot, as well as widening and extending the existing sidewalk that's on the west end of the lot down to Calmia, such that we're allowing more multimodal access in and out of the site from that end as well. Some of the other improvements that we recognize we need to make is the safety around the multimodal circulation happening in there. Our partners at Transportation and Mobility are going through a campaign. I think it may be called Way of the Path. They're finalizing their messaging around that, but they are looking for sites just like this, where they can more heavily influence the signing and messaging around path safety. So we would participate in that with them. Our staff and community have long wanted to provide additional Wi-Fi access out there. And we feel like if we are doing construction out in there, that it's not, it's significant savings to go ahead and pursue that as part of this construction project. We also have the opportunity to improve the accessible parking spaces, primarily to provide for rear loading vehicles. And then to improve the safety at that multimodal path crossing through the lot, where we might look at a raised crossing in keeping with transportation practices elsewhere. And then also looking to slow and filter the stormwater through the site, such that we want to advance all of the citywide goals around sustainability and resilience while we're in construction projects such as these. So just to walk you through what that might look like, again, if you're playing on certain fields, you would have the capacity to come in off of 28th, park in the lots, the church lots, and enter through that new gate on the west side there. If you are still coming in from 47th, it would reduce the volume of traffic coming in and out of the lot, partly because some would be parking in the church lots on Saturdays. And so we do feel like it would also improve some of the safety issues in there. And then again, at this point, we do anticipate that it would likely be southbound only out to Calmia. Next slide. We also wanted to make sure that while we know that any major transportation program, anything close to something like what we have at Chautauqua is expensive and has a lot of complications and such that the city wouldn't at this point explore running its own shuttle system out there. We recognize that there are opportunities for our vendors, for the athletic organizations to partner with hotel shuttles if they are for big tournaments, where those hotel shuttles might provide that same level of service or any private service that they're able to contract with. So they would be able to come through the lot and head south and park in the church lot as well. So we feel confident that we could still support that larger vehicle circulation. And in future capital programming, we would anticipate the opportunity to construct a multi-use path bypass around the east side of the lot. That's a project that our transportation and mobility staff has been trying to advance for grant funding for years. They have not yet been successful, but it's still on the books. We also know that there's the potential in terms of space to add in an additional roughly 45 spaces on site. But we would pursue that as what we would call an ad alternate, where if within the budget we find that it's possible, we would consider it. But likely it would be something that could happen afterwards if we feel like these initial improvements haven't done what we intend for them to do. And a longer term item is also to formalize on-street parking along Calmia. Right now that's signed as illegal because our transportation staff want to protect the bike use along Calmia such that there's not parking and doors opening and closing when bikes are already having to share the road. So what they would prefer is that we formalize, in a longer term capital investment project, we formalize that multi-use path and separate it on the north side of Calmia and then formalize the on-street parking. One of the great things about the stakeholder meeting that we just held was that our partners in transportation facilitated this portion of the meeting where they invited ideas and brainstorming around how can we start even this season reducing the number of cars that are coming to and from the site. Again, we want to be partners and advance citywide goals around sustainability and resilience. So how can we, invite our athletic organizations to organize things like bike buses? And even just the term bike bus was fairly new. And so, it was a really nice awareness building conversation. They're really interested in the carpool incentives, and that to them feels like something that's easy to move on this year. And both the rugby and soccer communities have said, yes, absolutely, we'll work on that. I mentioned also the private vans or shuttles, and so they have that on their radar as well. The conversation around e-scooters or e-bikes has been a little more lukewarm. That there's this concern that it's because people who are coming from out of town are already having to drive to the community, and then they're also carrying a lot of equipment to and from the site, that it would be less effective. But recognizing that biking in general is really important for our local community. And we know that on our busiest local game days, those bike parking lots are full and overflowing. So more emphasis on the biking approach than these others. We also have introduced the idea, and we'll formalize expectations with our athletic partners around the need to manage parking once the cars are there. We don't currently have any formal requirements around, for example, them providing communications to their participants or where signs get placed on a temporary basis on our biggest days, for example. And it's been inconsistent around how parking attendants get used. And the church, for example, has said we would absolutely support parking there on Saturdays. On Sundays, not so much, but we may still, depending on the biggest days, biggest tournaments, we might still appreciate there being a parking attendant out there to make sure that cars don't park in the lot. So those details are also being worked out as we formalize expectations with our athletic partners moving forward. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this, but just overall, after having held this stakeholder meeting, we're obviously meeting with you tonight and working through some of the smaller refinements that were recommended during that. They, in large part, they very much supported the proposal, and really we're just offering some smaller suggestions like, do you really need to add that new gate on the west side to connect to the church lot? Like, might it be, sufficient enough to just ask people to walk around the corner to that existing gate on the south side? So really, really helpful small refinements like that we're going to go through and continue to incorporate. Against and as we formalize agreements with the church, we're also going to have continued conversations with the Friends School. At this meeting, they were volunteering the possibilities of using their site for a number of reasons, even if it's just temporary drop off and pick up during this season, to divert some of that use onto their site and or overflow parking. So we're going to be following up on those and formalizing those agreements and supporting those early efforts to incentivize carpooling and other things as we move into final design and permitting. So with that, I welcome questions and feedback from the PRAB.
Great. Why don't we just go down the line, start down there if there are questions or feedback you want to provide.
We're active users of this soccer field and we live in the neighborhood. So I think these are all great changes. I do think that I think there is a big opportunity to increase bike use there, but it's going to require not only like the infrastructure changes that you mentioned, but also kind of operations changes from the field providers because they don't consistently make the bike gates open.
Yes.
So, and I don't know if that has to come from the leadership of the soccer clubs, but the people who are in charge of opening the gates don't seem to really see it as a priority. And it's like more of like, if I have time, I'll get over to it. And so when it's not consistently available, I think that decreases bike use. Thank you.
You bet. I appreciate that. And that is part of the conversation. Yeah, thank you.
I'm curious to know what a carpool is. How do you define that? Because in general, I've seen like 2 people equals a carpool in carpool lanes and things like that. So when I'm picturing, and my family does use these fields, our carpool is our family.
Yeah.
And because I have 2 kids who are still using booster seats, even if my husband's not showing up, we can still only fit 2, maybe 3 kids in our car at a time. So that's my first question.
Thank you for asking that. We have not gotten to that level of detail, but our partners in transportation and the ones who particularly deal with these kinds of programs are on hand to support us through these details. Initially, fabulous point. Maybe we need to consider it being 2 different families or something, not one. I don't know. Thank you for bringing that up. Well, yeah.
I mean, when I think of, and we live in South Boulder, and so there's no way we're biking. We've got backpacks, we've got chairs, we've got water bottles, and I'm always looking for a carpool. But like I said, it's like one other kid. It's not really cutting down too much on the driving. And I love the solutions you've come up with, but I also would love to see you encouraging I forget the word you use, the vendor, the people you're working with,
Sure.
BC United and the other people, like, especially for the younger ages who are in that situation where they have to be in a car seat and their parents are coming with them for a number of reasons, and often another small child. The logistics of getting to those fields, finding which field you're on, carrying all your stuff. It's the experience of going to those fields is not positive, generally speaking. And I would love to see you encourage that vendor to be partnering with BBSD schools to use some of the fields that are not used at all, that are in neighborhoods for those younger groups of kids who just don't need to be on those big fields, in my opinion. And that might just help mitigate the traffic situation to begin with. But I don't know, a couple other parents up here go to those fields, and it's, I never want to go to those fields. Maybe when they're playing tournaments, that would be exciting, but I still have 9 and under kids, and the several years that we've played there, I dread the drive and the traffic and the hauling of stuff and the fact that the bathroom is nowhere near where you are sitting with your little kids. So it seems like a more appropriate field for older kids, older families, tournaments. And I would love to see more use of local neighborhood parks and fields And that would just generally cut down on transportation.
Thank you, Sunny. We have not pursued that aspect of it. And I appreciate that recommendation. This is exactly the kind of feedback that we're hoping for tonight.
Well, first of all, thanks for considering our feedback that we provided earlier last year. Definitely appreciate seeing elements of that incorporated, and especially the transportation demand management and discussing those issues with the vendors, clients.
Sure.
Yeah,
Partners, stakeholders,
Yes.
organizations.
Thank you. I have a couple of concerns. One is that you're going to be adding traffic onto Calmia. At the same time, you're encouraging more families to use bicycles to get there. And Calmia has zero shoulder, and it's a straight line country road. It has very high exceedances of the posted speed limit because I used to live there, so I know. And so adding more bike traffic especially with kids to a road that's already got traffic problems, speed problems, not traffic problems, I think is problematic. I think you need to work with transportation to really develop a plan for safe bike infrastructure on Calmia. And they admit that because they don't want to allow parking along it, because they say that bikes have to be in the road, but now you're going to add more cars to that. So that's a concern, right? In your final recommended plan, you had additional road connecting the parking lot to Calmia. Is that intended to be one way? You mentioned that earlier, but then I didn't see that mentioned in the final drawing that it was going to be a one way.
Yes, that is still where we are at this point. The only refinement to that we've actually heard from our operations staff is regarding how some of our on our largest event days, we do have issues with Western coming through to remove some of the trash, for example, and it takes them like a half hour to just get from one end of the lot down to the southern end of the lot to remove it. So it was brought up sort of towards this very end of like, maybe we should consider that. But I think where the reason we've landed on the southbound only to this point is because of exactly what you were saying. We didn't want to add even more traffic to Calmia, and wanted to maintain that primary entrance being on 47th to preserve that rural character of that neighborhood in there as well.
Okay, thank you. And would the gates be closed when the fields are not open for
Yes.
Activities? Okay.
Mhm.
And will there be a gate on the other street so that people know that and don't try
That-
to use it? Yeah, okay.
that's
Well, if
correct.
it's one way, I guess they wouldn't be using it anyway.
Yeah.
I hope. There was one other thing. I'll come back to it. I'll think of
Sure.
it. Pass it over to Bernie.
So my question is also about cars on Calmia. And I'll betray my feelings about cars in saying this, but I have observed increasing amounts of what I would call scofflaw driving just in my daily life. I'm sure we would probably all agree there's more speeding, there's more rolling through reds when they're definitely red and not yellow, and making a right on red without stopping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How are we going to engineer this entrance to Calmia in such a way that people don't use it as an entrance?
Yeah, so the final design of that is something that we'll work with a civil engineer to work through. So I can't offer details about that right now, except to acknowledge that our partners at Friends School, for example, they know how confusing that is right now. You get to the end of Calmia and some people think you can get into the lot right now even, right? And so you get down there and you don't know what to do. Is that access into Friends School where I'm supposed to go, or am I supposed to just make a UE, or, so that as we work through that connection, the signing and the design of that roundabout, the connection in there will have to be considered. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, it was a very thoughtful kind of presentation and really response to the number of challenges that place presents. I feel the same way about Sunny. We're there a lot, and it's such a beautiful place. It's such a great field, but I do feel a sense of dread every time I see it on the calendar that because of the logistics, I'd almost rather go to Arvada to play at the Edge, even though their parking's a nightmare. But we go by bike, we go by car, and I think any way you go, there's challenges. I think to Anna's point, we've gone targeted the kind of northwest fields, knowing that that's where the game plays. We bike there or park there, and then the gate's locked. And so there's all sorts of challenges. I think this thing really addresses some of them, but it's just a difficult place. And so I appreciate the thoughtful approach to that. I have my questions. I have a few on like carpooling. So not so much the definition, but when you say incentivizing carpooling, like what does that mean? Like how is that enforced? I didn't even think about Sunny's point about adding even more to a family of 4 or 5, carpooling. But, if say you do say to BC United, you need to incentivize your teams to carpool. Like I said, what does that look like and how is that enforced? Like, are we going to have a monitor there making sure that, or parking only for?
Yes, we might consider having dedicated spaces for carpooling. But the bang for the buck would be in developing these agreements for events over a certain size, where we are actually detailing out what kinds of parking management they need to do when they're on site, again, around those parking attendants, for example, where we've started laying out sort of what size events are going to require what kinds of measures, right? So we'll formalize that with our vendors. And we started thinking through a process where staff needs to approve their transportation plan for those biggest events. So it would be staff's purview to consider what they think are going to be the peak hours there and make sure that all those measures are being addressed as need be. But it wouldn't be anything from the carpooling standpoint that we would truly be able to enforce as much as like that they've committed to doing it. And that the incentivizing could be where, like, we started talking at the meeting about, a carpooling contest, where they give out gift cards for, players who might do this the most often, or something to that effect. So it would look something like that, where it's voluntary. We recognize it's not going to significantly reduce the demand on the site, but every little piece of this matters. And so that's why we'd be pursuing this.
Okay. Just on that, someone told me that the trip tracker incentive program that goes to the school system, we fill it out every month. We get our little dollars and use them. Someone said it's an incredibly effective program and very well used. So that may be worth tying incentives to that. I didn't think so, but someone's actually told me that it's a very well used and effective program. I guess another question would just be on the agreements, both with the school and the church. And obviously this is preliminary. Like, what would that, is that financial incentives? Is that what does that look like with the two of them?
The Friends concept just came up at the meeting. And so we haven't pursued that in any detail with them. The conversations with the church have been, the church has been incredibly generous with the concept of this, such that they've highlighted the ways that they provide their spaces free of charge for community meetings and so on and so forth, and have not indicated in any way that they would ask for financial compensation for it. So that's where we are at this point in the negotiation, but we obviously want to respect and honor the operational needs they need to maintain. And so we'll continue that.
Sure. Great. That's great to know. And then just the last point, I think Sunny's comment was outstanding, of just like anything we could do to incentivize that field for older players. That seems that would address half of the problem, I would think, if you take the younger kids out of there. For a lot of reasons, we haul our stuff, we haul the grandparents, and it's a logistical, the bathrooms, the distance. And if we played at a school or a neighborhood park, as opposed to Pleasant View, like that would, I think people with young kids would have a better experience. And then I think we'd also at the same time address a lot of the traffic and congestion, issues as well. So anyway, thanks, Sunny. That was great.
I'm sorry. Can I ask a question? I don't have children who play soccer at these fields, but why don't we have soccer taking place elsewhere? Why is it all concentrated at this particular complex?
Well, I can chime in and just say that from a staffing perspective, a lot of the groups that we work with struggle to find field monitors and folks to work for them. And so the more locations that we're offering games, or they're offering games at, the more staff that are required. So most of the groups that we work with really want to be in one location that's a little bit more isolated, that they can handle all their games. So that's why it's not that we haven't tried to encourage them to look at other locations. It's just a convenience thing for them and their staffing models.
I'll respond to that, that they're not doing a very good job of it, even at
Right.
at Pleasant View. Like it's volunteer coaches and then high school students who maybe would rather be in their neighborhood than going to Pleasant View as well when we have somebody. So if you're negotiating with them, I would just point out that that maybe not be a good excuse. If they were religiously providing those services, great, but they're not as it is. So I don't think it's a reason to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll continue to work with the groups that that are using the spaces and continue to really collaborate as much as we can. We acknowledge that there's definitely some issues from a staffing perspective, and they're using volunteers and they're using young students and whatnot. And I agree with you. It can be definitely a little bit better organized. And I think we could spend some more time with our staff, working with them with the expectations for sure.
I just keep coming back to this whole idea of neighborhood schools and maximizing the use of those schools and partnering BVSD with our rec programs, because, you know, I think of like if there was a middle school or high school kid who's going out there to referee, someone has to drive them. They can't ride their bike necessarily that far on their own or whatever. So it's just adding, if we're in the neighborhoods, those kids might be more likely to say yes because it's less of a commitment and less intimidating. I don't know. There's many reasons, but I every time I drive by we have 3 elementary schools in our neighborhood and the fields are empty. And it kind of breaks my heart that we're driving all around town when our kids could learn to be more independent and bike themselves to activities instead of having to carpool.
I just had one more question about Chuck's comment about the lack of shoulders and putting more cars onto that area and also putting more bikes. Is there going to be any plan for speed mitigation, like putting speed bumps or something? Because cars do tend to just like shoot down that speedway really fast.
I appreciate that question. The city, so Transportation and Mobility is going through a process to look citywide at establishing more consistent criteria for speed limits so the community can understand sort of how that gets set. And we've just, at least I personally have just started interfacing with them in that program and trying to understand those inputs. So I can't for sure at this point say one way or another, but I know that the Vision Zero approach is such that they are looking where they can to improve traffic safety. So thank you for that too. We'll continue that conversation with them.
I remembered my final comment.
Great.
There was no discussion about charging for parking. And I see that as both a mechanism to discourage car use, but also as a way to raise funds for the programs that are using the space. So they could use parking attendants, volunteer parking attendants, charge $2 to enter the parking lot. And I think you would find that that would cut down a lot and improve carpooling. Sticks work as well as carrots too, are often better.
Do you want to respond?
I can chime in on that only because it's a segue to the next conversation, because I consulted with some of our experts in climate and sustainability as I gathered that presentation and talked about how in all of that work, we coordinate not only with transportation mobility, but with climate initiatives. And I had a long conversation. Chuck has brought up parking, charging for parking for probably all of his 5 years. And what I've said for 5 years is a couple of things is one, just the culture change of that would have our team be first through the wall in charging for recreational parking. And that's not a place that we have been in a position to do as far as from a change management perspective. Second, in some of our services, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage because other places aren't charging for parking. But third, if there was a reason why we could, both of those things are change management that you could address. And I talked to folks in climate initiatives if they thought that was the right approach. The input I got from those folks who are climate scientists, similar to Chuck, but at different levels, was that it wasn't where we should be focusing our energy and our efforts, that we had much more leverage to impact both climate mitigation and reduction with other efforts. So it's not that it's wrong. It's just when you have 100 strategies, it wouldn't reach the top tier of ways that we could be effective.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm thinking of it not in terms necessarily from the climate point of view, but in terms of needing to spend money to build more infrastructure. If you can solve the problem without spending the money, then I think that's a benefit for the department and the city. Okay, we're not going to be done by 7:15, sorry. Thanks very much for that presentation.
Bet.
Next up, we have Park on Violet.
That's me again. I also do have our consultant joining online. Her name is Ashley Pelletier. And as Audrey pulls up the presentation, I'll just share that I'll start the presentation and provide the first half, and then Ashley will join in to go over the latter half of the slides. So just one moment.
Hi, Ashley. When you've joined, will you just do a quick mic check? And I think you have camera privileges as well, if you're interested.
Thank you so much.
And Ashley, as I'm going along, since I have control over the presentation, just say next slide.
Thank you.
All right, let's
Thank
do it.
you. All right. And I assume you'll make that full screen for us. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay. All right. So this is a different part of the city, a different project, and has required a different strategic approach to both engagement and design and construction. So I want to take the opportunity, if you can go to the next slide, just to update you on the engagement that we've done to date and give you a preview of what's to come on that. We have been focusing a lot of our efforts in elevating the voices of the residents living in the Boulder Meadows manufactured home community, as well as those living in Ponderosa manufactured home community on the west side of Broadway. And then Ashley will come on to share the results of some technical site analysis that our consultant team has been preparing for us in order to inform design. So the process here has been to start with community values. So this is a piece of land that has been in the city's ownership for the better part of 30 years. And the community has come to, enjoy and appreciate it in certain ways. And we wanted to build on that and to build on the culture of the immediate neighborhood so that we could design and activate a park that is meaningful to that community and not just a rubber stamp approach. And that, if you can go back. Yeah, thank you. And so those community values, and I'll go over that in a minute, but they were confirmed through a lot of engagement and have then driven the site analysis in such a way to make sure that we are understanding the basic conditions that we're trying to either enhance or improve. We also asked in our first round of engagement a lot of questions around what do you want to do when you're here at the park, and wanting to start from that place of like, how do you want to enjoy it so that would drive design. This concept of a year in the life of a park is something that we've also tried to start thinking about in concert with the community, such that this is a park we want the neighborhood to enjoy all year long. And so when we think about those recreational activities, some of them are unstructured. It's just you go and enjoy the park. And others are formal events or formal programs that either we as staff or partners may provide. And how do those play out across all the 4 seasons so that we continue to have an activated park? And all of those components are informing the placemaking and space activation approach to that. Those are big words. I'll just say briefly that it's basically we're trying to really think about design of this in concert with the way we activate the park so that as soon as we're cutting the ribbon, the community is there ready to engage and run programs and play. And so where we are now is in early conceptual design, and that's what our next engagement window will be focused on. And then we'll move towards schematic design, a more detailed measured drawing for the site plan in the summer. So the next slide is a lot of text, and our consultants are quickly designing a beautiful infographic to convey all this, but we just wanted to give you a snapshot of what we've been doing. So we do have, now we have 3 paid community connectors. We've just hired that 3rd who's focused on engaging people with disabilities. She's also the city's youngest community connector, which is exciting. So she also brings a youth perspective. We've held 4 workshops with middle and high school students who are participating in our YSI program, Youth Services Initiatives, that are based in Boulder Meadows. Last year, we had 2 high school interns who got out to the North Boulder Rec Center and sat there and talked to a little over 30 people coming in and out. We've reached about 60 community members at block parties that the neighborhoods held both at Ponderosa and for Boulder Meadows. Our community connectors have also had direct conversations and gatherings with where staff wasn't even involved. It was terrific. And that brought in another 20 voices. We held an on-site gathering for young children and their caregivers, and around 100 community members attended an event on site in September that was called What's Up Boulder, which was a fun opportunity for pop-up play and engagement. And then later in the fall, we had done the analysis to understand what the community was telling us throughout all these engagements, developed an initial set of themes or community values, and then took those back out to the community to confirm them, to make sure, did we hear this correctly? And about 65 of them confirmed yes, and then helped us prioritize within that. Next slide. So I just want to scroll through these slides quickly just to give you some pictures, because it's nice to see the people that we're talking about. And this again involves, these are the YSI workshops. This is one of the highest highlights of my position right now, is getting to work with these kids. And this group is becoming almost a de facto advisory group, youth advisory group, because they live there, they love it, they continue to be involved and want to be going forward. Next slide. Just some, again, pictures of our interns at the rec center, the early childhood gathering, the block parties. Next slide. We held, before What's Up Boulder, we had a little volunteer event and invited people to come and paint the things that would be out there for them to enjoy at the What's Up Boulder event. So you can see on the left, for example, they're painting the chalkboards that we then invited people to write their ideas on. And I mentioned the pop-up nature play installation. So these were in large part materials that came from our forestry yard. That gorgeous cottonwood there with the curlicues, that came from our yard. It was just too beautiful to waste. And so we just brought it out on site and invited them to play. Go back one. These are pictures from the big event. That is Wilder, Great Outdoors Colorado's spokes creature, as they call it. And some other shots of just the community building that happened that day. Next slide. And then here's a picture of one of the chalkboards, for example. So we had these translated into both Spanish and Nepalese and hung on the fences out at the site for about 3 weeks. What was ironic is this is the picture from the day of What's Up Boulder. At the very end of that event, it poured and washed all this off. But that was the design. It was intended to do that. And so the community then kept coming back and adding to it. And so we have a series of pictures of these as they evolve over time. And through all that, that helped us understand these major themes or community values. And so that's what you're looking at here, as well as those top 3 that emerged as the most important to the community when we went back out in the fall to confirm. Go back one more. What's just important to point out here is the degree to which the community absolutely loves the natural components of this, and really want to both see that preserved and enhanced, and the opportunities to enjoy that, they want those to continue and be enhanced. There was also a lot of discussion, and continues to be, about how the park can and should be a place to gather safely, to feel like they belong there, and also to bring into that conversations and opportunities around food systems and arts and culture of their respective home countries. Next slide. These, as we were asking questions about what recreation activities they want to do there, this is a summary of how that shook out. Allie has heard me say this, but I put the chart in this order on purpose because even though winter activities got just a few votes, we were doing this engagement in the heat of summer and everybody was most focused on water play at the time. But we also know that kids want to get out there and sled and play in the winter too. So didn't want to lose that opportunity to point that out. But you can see also up there that there is interest in the sort of just the chance to hang out with family and friends, right? And to this idea of intergenerational fitness and wellness came up, where some of our youngest community members were saying, I want a place where my mom or my grandma can work out while I play, and I want to all be together at the same time. So it was really lovely to see this. So just a preview of what's to come. So as I mentioned, we are using all of this input to develop a set of 3 conceptual options, and that will be the focus of our next engagement window. We've also begun conversations with our YSI group around what the name of the park could be. So we did generate or collect a lot of ideas from the first engagement window. They've helped us continue to refine and consider that and interview their family members and to get even more ideas. That we'll bring those concepts into the next engagement window for the general public to weigh in on those ideas. We're also, as I mentioned, onboarding our newest community connector focused on accessibility. On March 14th, we are also facilitating a focus group to talk about, because wellness and mental health was a theme that emerged from the community engagement. We're hosting a small conversation with some mental health practitioners to talk about how the park can be part of the solution in terms of mental health, and how even if it's just contemplative spaces, quiet spaces, or whether it's inviting partners to come in and provide programming around this, how can we be part of that mental health conversation? And then we're holding a neighborhood meeting on Saturday, March 16th, and I would absolutely welcome and invite all of you to enjoy and to join if you'd like to. That'll be at Crestview Elementary from 12 to 2. We'll be in the cafeteria. And we'll certainly make sure it's on, the details are provided in your next packet. Our partners at Growing Up Boulder will also be hosting a few more on-site engagements with our youngest children to continue to get their voices in the mix as we move the potential designs forward. I also wanted to point out, you may have seen the good news that we received a technical assistance grant from the Safe Routes to Parks partnership. And that brings true technical assistance. They're bringing so much value to our community. I'm so grateful for that. And then it also will bring $10,000 for early action that we hope to take maybe as soon as this summer, if not early fall, where we can think about some easy ways to improve the transportation safety and access to and from the park, so that we're thinking of this holistically and not just the park itself. So we're going to host a community walk and roll audit with their help in late April in partnership with Crestview. So Crestview and BVSD have been a strong partner in these conversations. And then we'll move all that into schematic design, as I mentioned, for the summer, and continue to work with some more interns this summer. I mentioned the early action. We're also partnering with the North Boulder Branch Library, and we're staying tuned for when they announce the date for their grand opening, because we would love to partner on that as another engagement opportunity. And then we will bring the final recommendation for the name to you in July. We will bring the preliminary recommendation to you in May, and then ask you to vote on that in July. So that's the preview of where we are. The last slide I just wanted to briefly flash in front of you is just a list of all the partnerships that we've been developing through this process. We've got staff, as Ali mentioned, from Climate Initiatives involved, as well as a number of other departments, nonprofits, and community members around the city. So just real strong thanks for all the work from those partners. And with that, Ashley, I will turn it over to you to share some highlights from the site analysis before we wrap this up.
Thank you so much, Darren. Thank you all for having me this evening. You can go to the next slide. I just want to start off by saying Sasaki is extremely honored to be working with you all on such an amazing project, your first neighborhood park in a little bit, with the staff, with you all, and with the community. As Darren mentioned, I'm just going to quickly run through our site analysis, and that's really informing the concept designs that we're currently developing that we'll be sharing with you and the community at our March engagement window in the coming weeks. So starting off with view sheds, this is really what you see when you're driving along Violet Ave looking into the park. You see kind of this open meadow area that really provides safe sight lines into the 9 acres of the park. However, you don't have a buffer into the backyards of folks at Boulder Meadows community. So really looking at that as we go into design. If you go to the next slide, this view shed analysis really characterized the 2 landscape typologies of the site, open grassland and riparian forest, which isn't incredibly diverse for a 9-acre site along a creek. There are 29 species observed on the site. Most of them were non-native species. And, you know, we have this grassland species and then this tree line species going along 4 Mile Canyon Creek. So really, you know, kind of trying to diversify the species and height of the species as we go into design. When you go to the next slide, you can see the trees on the riparian corridor. The majority of them are cottonwoods, which are really weak wooded, weak limbed trees, which isn't incredibly ideal for a park setting. A lot of those trees aren't in great health. So when we go into design, we'll be looking at monitoring and identifying which trees are in the best health to preserve them and make sure we have that sufficient canopy for the park moving forward. Because going into the next slide, looking at climate adaptability, we know that we need to select plants that are going to be adaptable to climate predictions in the future. Our plant hardiness zone will change, it will be getting warmer. So making sure any plants that we install and have on site are adaptable to that. And if you go to the next slide, we also know we're going to be experiencing heavier rain in a short amount of time, which is extremely critical to this site because the next slide, we know Boulder experiences the highest flash flooding in Colorado, and this watershed, you definitely experienced that with the 400-foot drop on 4 Mile Canyon Creek in the watershed. And we've definitely experienced that on the site in 2013. As we know, there was a big flood in this watershed on Violet Park. If you go to the next slide, you can see by the number of restrictions that we have on the site, the majority of the site is in the high hazard zone. Again, like we saw in 2013, the amount of flooding, the amount of sediment that landed on the site. So there are a lot of restrictions onto what we can and can't do in development of this project. There is a center portion, that 2-acre center chunk that isn't lined by that red hatch, that we will have the opportunity to have a lot of robust programming that meets those activities that the community would like to see and their values. Go to the next slide. What's super interesting about this project and this park is it is a neighborhood park, like we said, which in your definition in the city of Boulder is a 15-minute walk shed to the community. That park is a 15-minute walk shed to the community. So you can see these concentric rings. Those are isochrones, so an actual, you know, walk, not bird, walking through the site. And we can see actually Boulder Meadows does not have a clear access to the parks around them, even though they have several in the periphery of their neighborhood. If you zoom in and go to the next slide, we can actually see that this is from physical barriers, a boundary from Boulder Meadows to the park site. There's a fence that runs along that property line that really prevents folks from accessing that park site. And it's crazy to think that a site directly adjacent from their backyard, that you can see their backyard, takes that long to get to. If you go to the next slide and zooming in a little bit more to this, you can see why there's no physical connections into Violet Parks. There's no sidewalks, there's no bike lanes, there's no connection to Crestview Elementary. There is a cow path trail that runs along the creek that's really beautiful that we'll be utilizing, but again, no infrastructure that goes into the park connecting it to the Boulder Meadows community. And the last slide. So we'll be taking all of these things that we found in the analysis, which are a lot. This is our opportunities and constraints diagram. We have a lot of things that we're contending with. This is a very complicated site, but we're really excited to dive into this. And you can go to the next slide to see the other side of the park. We're really excited to deliver a really robust programming strategy to the community to really deliver on what their needs are and make sure that this park is theirs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley. You can close out this. Yeah, thank you. I welcome any questions or comments at this point for either myself or Ashley.
Thank you. It's exciting to see this coming together. I don't really have any questions, but it's great to see.
Yeah.
Is the owner of the Boulder Meadows community cooperative with improving access to the park?
We are in the process of engaging more formally with them about this in the next few weeks. As we've engaged informally, there have been opportunities to even identify where our site boundary is. So for example, on the east side of the park, our property actually extends further than they realized, and they've been maintaining the turf on our behalf there, right? So there've been opportunities along the way to kind of engage with them informally, which have been absolutely congenial. And then we'll work more directly in the next few weeks to just be more discreet about the opportunities and needs to collaborate moving forward.
And is transportation and mobility discussing improvements to Violet Park and specifically the bridge over on Violet over 4 Mile Canyon Creek?
Thank you, Chuck.
Which
Yes,
has zero shoulder. It narrows down to just the width of the car lanes at that point.
yes, and it's one of the primary barriers to get to and from the park. And that bridge is one of, I've understood it to be the second worst performing bridge, which makes me, I feel a little competitive, like, why can't we be the worst performing bridge? But we're really close. So yes, it's in their plans as part of this project. Sasaki will help us come up with some conceptual designs for that so that it will tie into the park project. And then we'll also be in the next 6 months working out some phasing opportunities for funding and grant applications and so on with transportation and mobility.
Okay. I see 2 logical points of access between the mobile home park and the park on Violet. And the ones in the southwest corner where there's currently some construction parking that seems poorly used. And the other is the Apple Tree Court, the little cul-de-sac that points off in the southeast corner. So anything you can do by hook or by crook to get them to agree to provide access at those points would be great for the members of that community.
Thank you, Chuck.
I don't really have any questions, but the last slide we flipped through really quickly, and it was interesting just to see what the elements were that you were considering or had weeded out. And I would love to see that slide again.
Oh, sure. And what it is that it's actually just an excerpt from our design standards manual. So it's there, if you have any questions as we move through this. We recognize that we're so thrilled, first of all, to have a design standards manual. That's not always the case. Department's done a lot of great work getting us to this point, and we know that there are opportunities to improve that as we think through some of the equity components. And so we may need to explore some variations or some exceptions to those standards as we move into this. And those could involve the types of facilities that we wouldn't normally put in a neighborhood park, but we might consider in this case.
I don't really have any questions either. I just, this was a really great presentation. I feel like I learned so much to this, and just kind of hearing you talk about this process and the engagement and all the creative ways. It just seems like this is exactly like what you hope for from your local government. And so I just appreciate that, just kind of, it's like local government its best. So thank you for that work. Yeah, just a real like pleasure to watch that and hear the process to this point. So thanks.
Gosh, thank you.
Okay, no further comments. We'll move on to the climate initiatives discussion.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to present this item because it's a summary of work happening across the department. And this is a verbal presentation. It's on request from a board member. So we're just, it's kind of in the way of your study session topics where I'm going to share a whole bunch of information. And I'll probably try and go at a medium to high speed, but you can tell me where you want to slow down, ask questions throughout. So the first thing to start with is just that all the work that we do in the department, it's guided by, on the right there, that's the city's sustainability, equity, and resilience framework. And we talked about that at your retreat in February. There was a link to it in the consent agenda. All of the work we do in the department is guided by the 2022 Parks and Recreation Plan. When it comes to climate work, it's also guided by a couple of other documents. There is the city's climate action plan, and then there is a resilience strategy. And so the way I've framed this update tonight really is in the framework of those guiding plans. There's lots of things that people can be doing to address both climate change and prepare for climate change through mitigation strategies. I'm talking about the things where we all of the city have agreed that's where the most leverage is. So this slide actually, Ashley just covered the climate risks. Like, why are we talking about it? We know as the temperature warms, it's going to have impacts on our community and on our ecosystem. Extreme heat, drought, extreme weather conditions, they all will have impacts on both our plants and our wildlife and on our community. And so again, our efforts are both about what can we do to reduce climate change and what can we do to mitigate against these impacts that are already happening. And so I framed them around three key themes from our master plan, our department plan, sorry. So for community health and well-being, just a quick summary of what we have done in our 3 recreation centers. And this is now about a decade old. We spent a significant amount of money citywide to do a program called Energy Performance Contracting through the Governor's Energy Office. And it's where you contract against your utility bills by implementing facility improvement measures that save on your energy costs. So I always explain this with big round numbers. If before the energy performance contract, you paid $100 a month for your utility bill, and then you implemented facility improvement measures that reduced that cost, such as more efficient HVAC equipment, daylighting controls. After the contract, you're still paying $100 a month, 30 of it to pay off that new equipment, and 70 is your reduced utility bill. So that's something the city's done citywide. The key takeaway for you all is if there's low hanging fruit on facility efficiency, the city has done it. Our recreation centers have daylighting controls, meaning when there's enough daylight in a space, the lights turn off. This is true in our gymnasiums and our pools, the gymnastics center at the North Boulder Rec Center. We have occupancy controls on the HVAC equipment. So if a room does not have people in it, it slows down the cooling and the heating. We have really efficient equipment. On our pools, we have, even though pools are an incredible energy hog, we have what are called variable frequency drives. So there is a sensor that measures the turbidity of the pool. And if it's clean enough and the water quality is where it should be, the pool motors slow down and it stops churning the water at the turnover that is normally necessary. We have photovoltaic and solar thermal at our recreation centers. And Jonathan gave me some of the recent data. The solar thermal that is functioning east and south will save the city $15,000 a year, reduce carbon emissions by more than 125 tons. Unfortunately, the solar thermal system at the North Boulder Recreation Center is not functioning, but when it was installed, it was one of the city's largest solar power systems. We're also, I think we've talked to you before about the vehicle to building pilot that we have in place at the North Boulder Recreation Center. Sunny and Bernie, have you two heard about that? So we have an EV vehicle at the North Boulder Recreation Center that when it's not in use, it's actually sending charge back to the facility. It resulted in a charge that reduced energy consumption by about 3%, which doesn't amount to a lot when you look at the building, but when you look at how that could scale, it's a pilot that's been recognized across the country, and it's a super cool experiment, and that's all really in partnership with climate initiatives. So that's what we've done.
Can I say a follow-up question about that? That's literally just like one car, and we're using that car's battery to store energy and then send it back into the building overnight.
One car.
It's impressive.
It's super cool. Yeah. And so the question is, you know, we know that two-way charging can reduce energy questions, and you can explore more scenarios. What if the entire city fleet looked like that? So what if you set it up for residential and office buildings? Like there's really a lot of opportunity to scale. So that's what we've done. Here's what's ahead. I mentioned earlier, we've taken care of the low-hanging fruit. It's going to take major renovation and significant renovation to get to the next level with the recreation centers. And in some ways, it's going to also take incredible innovation. There does not yet exist a pool boiler that can heat and treat 200,000 gallons of water with renewable resources. It is all through natural gas. And so Jonathan and I are becoming best friends. We wrote a song together on ChatGPT today about parks and climate. I'm going to share it with you, Chuck, because it's amazing. But just, you know, ideas, how could we work with the university and maybe have a design challenge with some electrical engineers or others to what does it look like to create this equipment? You all know that there's a major renovation funded at the East Boulder Community Center, and a big outcome of that project is an energy retrofit. One of the biggest ways that buildings become more efficient is by improving the envelope or the outer core of it, so that whatever is happening inside stays inside, whether you're heating or cooling. And that, again, with the heating of our community, recreation centers often become cooling centers for not everybody has air conditioning. And so community spaces more and more are becoming wellness hubs in that way. I'll share part of the reason Jonathan and I were chatting today is because I took this language and I put it into ChatGPT, because this is not plain speak. Basically, what it means is we're going to try and use less carbon in the construction and operations of our recreation centers. But with the Pleasant View conversation, you all touched on something really important. It's also about the programming of the facilities. And so the Future of the Rec Centers project, we will very much be looking at what should be close to home opportunities that people can just walk or bike to at their neighborhood recreation center, and what are regional amenities that you're just going to have one of in the community. And gymnastics is a great example. We're not going to have 3 10,000 square foot gymnastics center. There will be one. So we look forward to that conversation. I'm going to shift to taking care of what we have. And I just want to note that there's some policy language up here, because really it's infused in everything we do in the way we maintain the land. It's this ecosystem approach. You heard it in Darren's presentations tonight for both of them. They're looking at how do we increase stormwater detention at Pleasant View. We're looking at the ecosystems and again, stormwater detention at Violet. And so this is, I mean, if I were to list everything we do in this realm, we would be here all night. So I just wanted to show you these two policies that are really embedded in everything we do, that it's about the design, the operations, so that we're always working to reduce emissions. But I do have some highlights for you of what we have done. Aubrey, if you want to go to the next slide. So here's something we have done. So I actually took this picture today because I was like, this is perfect, because we had a meeting tonight. I snuck out at lunch and I got a hike so that I could stay awake past my bedtime. And the lower right hand of that picture is Wonderland Park, and you see trench lines across it because we just replaced the irrigation there. Anytime we take care of something in our system, we build it better. So one, just in replacing it, certainly that infrastructure had aged and had water loss, but the water-wise controls. So I think the current number is close to 90% of our parks have water-wise controls. So really being thoughtful about water consumption. Last spring, when it was especially rainy, we saw that in the data that we were able to not use water in irrigating our systems. Small equipment throughout our system, 75% of it is electric. Where it is not is likely because equipment just hasn't gotten there yet. There's some snow removal equipment where the gas powered still is the only way we can achieve the job. There's some work on the mall that can only be achieved at this point with gas powered equipment. But we have an incredible partnership with Toro, with Steel, and a couple of other manufacturers that when they have new equipment, we're often the first to test it because they know that we're an eager partner. We have robotic equipment. We have a robotic. So you all were talking about your headaches with Pleasant View. Our headache with Pleasant View is painting it. it can take 2 folks 2 days. And we have a robot that does it at about in half the time, and it's electric. So it's pretty cool. Just this last fall, a gal you met tonight named Darren Wagner worked with some connections, and we brought in a program from the CSU Agricultural Extension. We trained 15 of our employees from across the department on sustainable landscape maintenance practices. So in addition to learning about pollinators and other reasons why, they learned, details about being thoughtful about something as simple as where you dump snow when you're doing snow removal can impact how different wildlife and animals are wintering. And so it was an incredible thing. And I'm very grateful to Darren for organizing that. And we know it'll continue. We also, Jonathan highlighted, and I always forget about this one because it's such a part of the way we work, but we use very little pesticides. On our athletic turf, we use no pesticides. And where we do use pesticides, it's because the value has been deemed worthy of it. Tree care is an area where we have some approved pesticides. The value that trees provide, I'm going to talk about in a minute, but it has outweighed the impact of using the pesticides. But just some talking points, pesticides can impact human health. They can contaminate waterways, hurt and damage ecosystems. And so we've managed our turf grass without pesticides since 2002. And so that means when you see the beautiful turf at Pleasant View that is all turf, it doesn't have dandelions and other, that happens mechanically and through really good cultural practices where they really cultivate healthy turf so that there's no room for the weeds. In the spring, when you see dandelions all over our parks, you can celebrate them. It's because we are not using any pesticides. So almost all pesticides are banned on city property, including the neonicotinoids and glyphosate that are seen to be so incredibly negative in value to pollinators and other insects. So what's next for taking care of what we have? I'm really excited. Our Parks Maintenance Manager is working with some folks in climate initiatives, and we're going to be piloting some low and no mow areas and low water turf over the next couple of years. We're hoping to turn those into some design standards where we have more low mow, no mow areas and inactive areas in our parks. Our current research is showing that there's not a turf mix that stands up to active use. You're hearing a lot right now about different turf in Colorado. You heard earlier, native prairie is a lot of our natural ecosystem. Unfortunately, native prairie doesn't stand up to 1,300 kids playing soccer. So we're not there yet, but we're going to keep piloting it. And one thing, just as a reminder at Violet, we are also going to be piloting the sites rating, which is, if you've heard of LEED certifications for buildings, that's about around, yep. So sites is similar. We're not going to actually go for the accreditation because it comes with cost, and we're not really interested in checking the box. It's more about the learnings from this initiative. And I'll also note that the field of landscape architecture, the membership association is the American Society for Landscape Architects, or ASLA. Their discipline and what they're doing for their commitment to climate action, I think it's actually leading of all the disciplines that I'm involved in. I'm very impressed with their commitment to climate resilience. They have a written commitment to the way that they think the industry should respond in. They are doing grant making right now for a lot of the construction companies to reduce the embodied carbon that they're using in the materials for park design. It's impressive. But lastly, we're hoping to learn from all of that to update our design standards. Darren mentioned those a bit ago. How could we include typologies in our passive areas of our park that make it part of the design standard that's a low mow, no mow area with lower water turf? I can pause there for questions, or I can shift to trees. Ready for trees? Okay. So trees are incredibly important in keeping Boulder's neighborhood cools. Their canopy, which is the layer of leaves and branches that form the treetops, provide shade and cover. They absorb heat as they release moisture from their leaves, keeping water in our landscape and people cool on hot days. This picture here is the heat mapping that the city did last year. This was through our climate initiatives department. There were a bunch of people who drove around with vehicles that were capturing measuring the air temperature. And this area map is an overlay of the temperature and the tree canopy. And it just shows that areas that had heavier tree canopy actually had lower temperature, and evidencing just those cooling benefits. So that's pretty exciting. As it relates to the urban canopy, we are implementing the urban forest strategic plan steadily, trying to really achieve a goal of maintaining 16% canopy cover over our community. So that's a metric that cities use. Ours was 16% in 2013. I suspect we're about to update our tree inventory, and I suspect we've dropped slightly because of the losses that we experienced during the pandemic and due to emerald ash borer. And so I expect that we'll be doubling down over the next couple of years so that we can achieve that target. We're working on tree planting design standards. You heard a little bit again, Violet was such a great, one of the things we know, for example, the trees recommended in the Olmsted plan 100 years ago assumed that Boulder had an ample supply of water. It does not. And the trees that we plant, we really need to be thoughtful about. Play, our incredible philanthropic nonprofit partner, of which Chuck is a board member, is an incredible sponsor for the Tree Trust. This is where they take community members and teach them to be tree tenders. One of the biggest risks to a newly planted tree is just lack of care in the few years before it's established. And so having folks who know what to do to help keep it watered and thriving those first few years are really important. The Tree Trust also serves as a funding mechanism, helping us with tree giveaways to the community and with additional tree plantings. And then finally, just Cool Boulder is the whole campaign that's engineered out of the Climate Initiatives Department. It's all nature-based solutions, and we partner with them heavily. You've heard that throughout this. So I think that maybe that bullet is duplicative. So that's what we've done when it comes to the urban canopy. Here's what's next. And this is just on the next slide. Some of the mapping has allowed us to see where the urban canopy is different based on sub-community in Boulder. And so we really want to set some urban canopy goals by sub-community. Again, when you layer in equity, there are parts of our community where the tree canopy is lighter than others as a result of either just lack of planting, lack of care, or not good surfaces. So that's something that we're looking at. We're really working to restore and then grow our tree planting and care. We're not quite yet back at 2019 levels, but we're hoping to get there. And then I mentioned a minute ago that we're updating our tree inventory this next year. I feel like I should ask Darren to come up and present this next slide. You're done. You're done for the night. This slide, I get to celebrate the incredible work that our planning department is doing. And you heard it again in her presentations earlier tonight. They're not only committed to being great landscape architects, but they love, and in fact, Mark is actually shifting the way we talk about this. We keep talking about the things that should be in parks. And Mark keeps asking, why aren't we talking about the people in parks and what they're doing in the activities? And so when Darren talks about shifts in our design standards, it's going to be about activities. And we're looking forward to that. But we are a cohort city for the National League of Cities and the Children in Nature Network. They have a program called Cities Connecting Children to Nature. If you Google it, some of the first things you find will be stories written by our teammates. On just the work that they are doing. And I've highlighted some of it here. They've led equity mapping so that we can see where in our community do youth have access to nature, or where are there perhaps gaps to green or blue spaces. Mark and Darren are doing this incredible work around eco-healing and thinking about how kids too are experiencing the trauma of climate change, and talking with kids about their feelings and how their feelings are impacted positively when they connect with nature. The bottom of that graphic there on the right is just that feelings wheel. And it's a way we talk to not just kids, but also adults about really understanding what's happening when you're in a place. And they both have presented both locally and then nationally on early childhood access to nature. So if I guess maybe I should be really explicit that we've got some incredible folks on our planning team, and I'm really grateful with the work ahead. So here's what's next. You all have heard us talk about the Child City Friendlies initiative that we are working on with Growing Up Boulder. That is a program out of UNICEF USA. The result of that will be a youth plan for Boulder. And I'm very excited for how it should unify and understand what the services we're providing for kids are across our community and how we could do it better. I expect us to talk about things like what should be close to home activities for kids. So they've also helped spearhead the Boulder Youth Nature Initiative, which is a partnership with open space and mountain parks and other folks across the community, including the Thorn Nature Center. We're going to take that work and inform 6 play area projects over the next 4 years, 3 years, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. It'll be done tomorrow. 6 years. Over the next 6 years with every playground renovation, you'll really see us leaning into this nature play. You saw some pictures with Violet. And then they're also working with, you heard Darren highlight how they're working with youth services initiatives. So in our department already, we have folks who their role is to serve kids. And so with the incredible knowledge that they have around access to nature and eco healing, they're imbuing that knowledge onto our staff so that we can just make our programming richer. Okay. How do we measure it? So currently, just wanted to let you know the things that we measure. I mentioned the carbon footprint for the rec centers. We measure our fleet and equipment electrification. We measure the urban canopy coverage. Things we could consider. So we're always looking at updating our key performance indicators to make sure they're relevant is the citywide strategic plan includes a goal to increase community within a 15-minute walk. And so, or 15-minute neighborhoods. And so that's something that we can really lean in on. And right now, I know we're close to 90% when we add schoolyards into that mix, but it'd be really helpful for us to understand where our gaps are. Water consumption in parks, we measure, but we don't necessarily let it drive any strategies right now. So we could tie that to that park typologies work that I mentioned. And then finally, just electrification of facilities. That's really the biggest opportunity we have. If we can wean ourselves off of natural gas in our recreation centers, that would be an incredible achievement. That's the end of my presentation.
Thanks. That was very impressive. Why don't we start on comments with Sunny and then work our way back this way.
I don't have a lot to say other than I'm really glad that you're looking at neighborhood activities and just making that more accessible and convenient and just realistic for people to enjoy what's right there rather than drive all around looking for something. So thank you.
Yeah, that was a great presentation and you're doing a lot of really exciting work. I'm going to push back a little bit on what you said earlier about parking. And if you look at it as an individual item, it does not contribute much to our greenhouse gas emissions. What it does, though, it's a cultural shift that we need to have, right? And by providing free parking and ample free parking, you're encouraging people to drive, whereas by providing less parking or paid parking, you're discouraging it. And over time, the net result of that is that people learn not to drive nearly as much, not just to parks, but to other things that they do in their lives. And I remember a short film I saw on YouTube a couple of years ago. It was someone from New York interviewing people in the Netherlands about this lady was biking to the grocery store. He said, "Why are you biking to the grocery store?" And she said, "Are you crazy? There'd be no place to park if I drove, and it would take longer to get there. It'd be less convenient. I'd have to pay for parking. No one's going to drive to the grocery store." And he has something similar of someone going to a park with their kids in one of these cargo bikes, it looks like a wheelbarrow with the kids in front. And they said the same thing. They said, "Why would I drive? Like it'd be less convenient and there'd be no place to park." So, people do what's logical and what's made logical for them. And so that's sort of the change I want to see in our parks and recreation facilities and other city facilities.
I'll go on the record as saying that I also like paid parking. I think it's an important tool for urban planning and transportation planning. And while I understand that there's a certain reluctance from the department, Allie, I hope it's something we'll continue to talk about because of all the reasons Chuck just mentioned. And I'll say that the greatest sadness that I have with this broken patella of mine is that I had to drive my car here tonight. It was terrible. It wasn't that bad. Thank you for the presentation. It was informative. I don't have any questions about what you discussed. Well, I have one question actually. It's great that you have so much electrically powered equipment, servicing the parks. That's great to hear. I'd love to hear just a little bit about the limitations of that. Like what kinds of equipment can't be electrified, and what happens when we have outages that happen once in a while.
There's three types of equipment for which there's the biggest limitations right now. One is chainsaws. Electric chainsaws just aren't doing it for a lot of the forestry work. So that's probably where most of our non-electric equipment is. The blowers on the Pearl Street Mall, the amount of work that it takes to keep that mall in the condition that is expected, given the high visibility, the economic impact of that area, the electric blowers just aren't strong enough. Most of the areas in the system, the hardscape, it's not as important that it look the way Pearl Street looks, and the electric blowers work just fine. I said three. What was the third one that I thought of? I might have to get back to you.
Lawnmowers?
Snow blowers.
Oh.
We don't use those in very many places though. There's lawnmowers. So I was talking about small equipment when I was citing those statistics. Lawnmowers, most of our lawnmowers are gas powered. We continue to pilot EV and even electric and hybrid models. Most lawnmowers that have a 6-foot deck or bigger are not quite there yet with the capacity of an electric mower. Again, we have a great partnership with Toro, and when they develop them, they have us try them. Golf just bought their first one last year, so they have created some groundskeeping equipment for golf courses, and we have one out there. But general park equipment, and I actually spoke to the Toro rep in December, and they're not having a significant demand for it to work on the development of the equipment. But
could you answer the second part of the question?
tell me, I'm sorry.
What happens when the batteries can't be charged?
It's not been an issue. So if there's, an electric outage in Boulder, that's not been a long-term issue. And if there's a long-term electric outage, we have bigger problems than not being able to string trim or.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. Thanks.
I will give an example. Sorry, I just want to give an example. So are you all familiar with Ready to Work? It's a program through Bridge House. It's where they take folks and put them in full wraparound, folks experiencing homelessness. They're in full wraparound services. We contract for 3 different crews in Parks and Recreation. One of them, they do string trimming. And so they have 4 string trimmers and 12 batteries to get through a day of work. And so we just buy more batteries, and then they all charge up overnight. But it does, it takes coordination and thoughtfulness.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you for all that. I don't want to turn this into a discussion on parking, but I saw something where it was basically like Amsterdam hasn't always been Amsterdam, and there are pictures of, what it looked like in the 80s and 70s full of cars. And so it was, very thoughtful, mindful approaches to policy, including, how they view parking and how they kind of incentivize biking. So I want to be aligned with those comments as well. I know they're the challenges you raised, Ali, about being kind of first out of the gate with that and competitive disadvantage. But I do think generally in this country, and even in a bike friendly city like Boulder, parking is just too easy, and we incentivize driving because it is so easy and free. So anyway, my thoughts on that. I had a question on that. You said something about pools and how there's not currently a system to heat pools electrically. How does, I don't think it's the same thing, but the stuff that the updates happen in East Boulder Rec Center, how is that related? And is there any component of that is heating pools? I thought there was some electrification there.
So at both East and South, there is what's called solar thermal. And that's where it's a G word. What's the stuff that's glycol? Well, for East, do you want to come take that? Mark Davison just rose his hand to answer that question for you. But what I heard you is what we have now, and that's solar thermal. And that's just where water is preheated before it goes through the boilers, preheated through a heat transfer of glycol that gets heated, and then it gets transferred through some engineering magic. And so basically makeup water hits our pipes at 56 degrees. After going through solar thermal, maybe it's 80 degrees, and then the boilers only need to heat it for another 10. That's what exists now. For East, Mark is going to share more.
And Kristen Seeley's our architect and facilities looking into this. But one thing exciting about East we're going to explore is the idea of geothermal. especially as we're looking to redevelop that parking lot and the potential for that. And that's something we haven't done before, which will be really interesting to explore because that is free ultimately, apart from the maintenance of it. I know I've had quite a long day today, apologies. Geothermal is a very simple system in the sense that you've still got like an electric heater, let's just say. What you can do is tap in with a bypass because you're running pipes underground with water where it brings up the temperature underground and then brings it back to the heater. So that can boost up the heat level. It doesn't take care of all of it, more like a supplement to the system. And the efficiency and capacity of that is what we'll have to explore.
The other word I've heard mentioned is a wastewater heat transfer. So there's pretty major wastewater heat pipes, not wastewater heat, wastewater pipes underneath the East Boulder Community Center that have some heat to them. And there's a way you can transfer that heat to heat the pool. So all kinds of engineering magic to be explored. Did that get, okay.
I just want to add one more comment that I loved the shift in focus to the people and how the people want to use their space. And it brings me back to our little Shanahan Ridge neighborhood park where, the people want to gather and there's no tables, there's nowhere to sit and there's very little shade. And as a result, we don't gather there and we don't have yards to gather in. So it really does cut down on the idea of being a community and being able to come together in a space and make use of what could be a really wonderful park that just needs a couple tables. So just going to say that again, probably every week or every time I see you. Just need a little more over there in Shanahan Ridge. But I also want to go on the record saying I do not like paid parking in this situation. My husband's Dutch. I've lived in Amsterdam. I love that you can bike everywhere. It's flat and you don't have to bike as far there because there are neighborhoods that have the things that you need within a smaller radius. And again, if we can start working on having things in a smaller radius, then maybe we will bike more often. But I will also say that there could be, I live right up from Fairview, and the amount of able-bodied single people who are driving to school drives me nuts. And I feel like there could be a little bit more effort to encourage certain able-bodied populations in Boulder to bike more. Like there are just phases in life where biking is not going to be a possibility for everybody. And people with young kids or older people, it's just not okay to expect everybody to be able to do that. They just have limitations. So I do not encourage the paid parking.
I think the problems with people driving to Fairview is a substantial problem that perhaps a colleague on the school board will be able to help us with in the future.
Okay, any further discussion on this topic? Great. We didn't meet your 7:15 hope deadline. Sorry, Allie.
It wasn't my hope. I was just supportive if it
Oh,
was.
okay,
your
good. Next up, we have matters from board. The first item is the May meeting date, which has something for you to discuss because I won't be around here.
There's 3 of you. So if you want, we can table this to the March meeting, or we can send out a poll, or we can wait till the second week of April to poll the full board. Or we could just reschedule it. Jason, you don't matter either. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, we'll send out a poll. Yep, we'll do that. Can I also note, Rosa noted here that the council chamber is for both dates, but I wanted to capture a conversation I think I heard after your retreat where you enjoyed being at the Brunton building. If you all would prefer to be in one of those less formal settings, we can certainly explore that. Brenton could work great. I know other boards meet there. My one concern would be it's not very often, but every now and then we have a meeting where there's a lot of public interest. And so in that case, we could just maybe open those doors, or that would be my one concern with moving. It's rare, but so something for you all maybe to consider or discuss.
You can probably anticipate which meetings are going to have high demand. For example, if prairie dogs come up. So it might be reasonable to meet there for most meetings. And then if there's something on the agenda that we think is going to be a hot button, we can schedule it for back here. I also don't know about the convenience of that location for people, if it's more or less convenient than coming here. I mean,
It's a mile closer to our offices. So, I mean, most folks. come.
closer to your house, closer to my house.
Yeah, exactly.
And it does often feel silly to be sitting on this dais to this empty room.
Yeah.
Oh, there will be people participating in the future.
One
You
can
know,
only
the
hope.
3 people, yeah. Or 5, and sometimes there's 20 if you talk about prairie dogs, so. Okay, next up, we have the letter to council for the retreat. The council's retreat. And so at our retreat, we discussed the intent of this letter and what might be in it. And we came up with, I think we had 3 things that we talked about being on there. The first of them, and I'm sorry that Anna's not here, was funding for equity programs, and that segued into swimming, teaching swimming as a life skill for all youth in Boulder. And that segued into the need for renovated rec centers. Those are sort of the 3 main thrusts of what we discussed. I don't think there was anything else that we focused on that I can recall. I went back and looked at the video, and that was what I got out of it. So the question is, the intent tonight, I think, is to assign writing duties for writing a draft letter, which we can then circulate before the next regular meeting. And then we would approve the letter for the next meeting, and then it would go off to council for their April retreat. When is their retreat?
April 4th.
April 4th. Thank you.
The due date, I believe, is March 22nd. So believe you all will review it March 18th, and
Yeah, and agree or disagree on it at that point. So what we need right now, I think, is people to actually write a draft letter.
I prefer not to, so I wasn't at the meeting, but I would love to volunteer to be the first editor.
Okay,
I nominate Elliot.
you nominate Elliot? Yeah, he has nothing else to do. I felt like Anna was very passionate about it, and so I would like to offer her the opportunity to participate. I also don't want to dump it on her if she doesn't have the bandwidth to do it. So I'd prefer not to do it because I'm not going to be on the board much longer, and I think it's something that others should take on. And Jason probably feels the same. Yeah, and I've done it. So I propose that I reach out to Anna to see if she's interested in taking a crack at it first. I'm happy to help, and I think we need only 2 people to really communicate closely about it so that we don't violate open meeting laws. Any suggestions on beyond that?
If Anna can't do it, I'll take it on.
Okay. That's very kind of you. And it is easy to watch the video to see the discussion. It lasts about 10 or 15 minutes, so it's not terrible. So I'll send an email out to Anna, and I'll CC Rosa so that it's in the record, and see if she's interested in taking it on. And I'm happy to work with her, or if you want to work with her, you know, if she would like help with it. It's more than one person should do, I think. So I'll suggest that to her. Thank you very much. Any other comments on the letter to council? Okay. Next up, we have Crab Matters. So this is an opportunity for members to talk about any interactions they've had with the community members about concerns. in general regarding parks? Anything that's a broad of scope that you want to bring up that we haven't discussed tonight and is not set for agenda in the future? And any future agenda items you might want to see included?
I have two. Just want to note that week before last, we had a meeting with the leadership of Boco Pickleball and Boulder Tennis Association. Tina ran the meeting and presented some of the plans, some of the preliminary plans for the court system. Both groups were quite pleased with the proposals. Of course, they're always very concerned that they're not going to get everything that they want. But it was a productive conversation, and like Ali noted, there was good press coverage. We have a meeting on Monday for the broader court sport community, which I'm sure will be quite popular with those folks. I'm looking forward to attending, and I want to thank Tina and Charlotte for their leadership on that issue. It's been great to see their work. And then I just want to mention on a personal note, I've been using the rec center myself for the first time in a long time, and it's nice to be in the facility and to see how well they're run and to see the community enjoying them. I go to the East Boulder Rec Center because the South Boulder Rec Center, which is 3 minutes from my house, does not have an arm bike. So there you go.
I just have, it's not really, it's more of a comment. I think I've raised this before, and I don't want to end on a negative note, I guess, but one thing I noted in reading the packet is just the number of references to consultants. I'm a consultant. I hope I provide value to the people that I work with. But I'm really mindful of how often that is. And, clearly in this presentation, there was a lot of value added. And I don't want this to be kind of my parting thoughts on the board, but I do hope, and I know we are, but, there's kind of continuous mindfulness about, relying on outside expertise and not growing it in-house. Just anecdotally, I still work. I worked in the federal government for a long time, and there's just been a huge exodus of expertise and the reliance on consultants. And it's very harmful to agencies or departments. And so I don't think that's at risk here, but I hope there's a very high threshold for when we do, hire, because I'm sure there's, significant costs. But it also, it takes, both learning and other ways we can kind of grow staff. And I know you all are great leaders and do that, but I just hope that there's an eye to that, a regular eye to that, because I do, like I said, I'm kind of harming my own profession since I am a consultant, but, particularly as it relates to government and local government in particular, that, really kind of being, those are significant costs. And I hope it's at a very last resort that we kind of rely on that level of expertise. So.
Did you want me to, I'm happy to share a little bit if you want. I agree with you. And I would add, for us, the more we have in-house talent, the more cost effective it is, right? I look at our attorneys. When I talk to colleagues who don't have in-house attorneys, I feel bad. I have a fellow director who gets 20 minutes with their attorney once a month. And then anything beyond that, is like $600 an hour or something. I can call an attorney anytime I want and get great legal advice. And I'm so grateful that Boulder has such an incredible in-house talent in our attorney's office. When we use a consultant, it's for a few reasons. One, it's really specialized skill that we don't have in-house. Capacity. So, and especially this is a bit of a good problem to have with the capital funding that we got with the renewal of the 0.25 cent sales tax in 2015, we have more capital to spend and we don't have the staffing capacity to spend it. I will note that Mark made one change pretty quickly. Within 6 months of getting here, we reduced some capital funding. We hired 2 entry-level landscape architects to do in-house CAD work and other things that we're silly to be outsourcing. So it is something we look at consistently. And it really, the decision around is capacity. Can it happen better or faster if we get some help on it? Or is it a skill set? For example, aquatics, obviously buildings are different, but you only design a pool every, 15, 20 years. We're not going to have someone who is an expert in designing pools on our team. So that's how the evaluation goes. We'd prefer to do it in-house. We just don't always have the capacity or the expertise.
Great. Anything else on Pratt Matters? Okay. Our next board meeting will be March 18th, 2024. It will be here, right?
Incorrect. This building is being.
Sorry,
this
that's
space is
right.
being run- We will be at the Municipal Services Center on Old East Pearl. So if you know where the Corwin Toyota is there's a little frontage road. Does anyone go to the Parkway Cafe? Greasy Spoon,
Yeah.
great Boulder breakfast.
Yeah.
It's east of that on Old Pearl.
Right. I think I've been to one meeting there.
If you are biking, is right off the Goose Creek path.
That's right. Great. Well, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting then.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you all for a nice meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.